is independent Silicon Valley. So, just before we hop into all the other questions and all, Ashwat, if you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free to do so.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Ashwit. I've been doing DECA since I was a freshman, so for about 4 years now. I've mainly stuck towards doing events in the hospitality cluster. So I started out doing principles of hospitality and tourism, and then for the last 2 to 3 years, I've been doing quick serve restaurant management. And yeah, just been a great journey.
Great. What initially sparked your interest in quick serve restaurant management from like the hospitality stuff that you used to do earlier?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to continue in the hospitality cluster just because I found that like it was one of the easier clusters to compete in, and there was like a lot of opportunity for like being creative and like innovating. Why quick serve specifically? I just thought that it was an event that was like less kind of popular. Many people in my school hadn't really done quick serve before, so I just wanted to try something new.
All right. And you mentioned how not that many people in your chapter competed in QSRM. So what would you say then, after you kind of participated, competed in it for your first year, you said you did it for, I think, 2 years. So what is it that you kind of love the most about the event, or what really draws you the most to it?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's really unique about quick serve is that every scenario you get is kind of something that you've already experienced in life, right? Because all of us, like, we all go out to like restaurants or like fast food restaurants, and it's really cool to see how like your everyday scenarios kind of translate to like a business role play. And I think that's something that also allowed me to succeed because part of like having a real world experience translate to a business scenario is that you can be creative and like use details from your own life. So that's kind of what's like allowed me to like succeed and stand out, I guess, is that, being creative and like using your own life experiences in the event.
All right, cool. So what specific methods or resources do you recommend for someone just starting in QSRM?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is just be up to date with like your business vocabulary and like current events in the industry. I think like learning about some fast food chains' marketing processes or like their business models, learning that ahead of time allowed me to like implement these solutions into my role play. And that's something that made me come off as more professional and, just really let the judges know that I've been preparing, I know what I'm doing, and it allowed me to stand out for my competition. So definitely like be up to date with current events and make sure you understand the business vocabulary that's being talked about in the role play.
All right, so kind of more hopping into competitive success now. How did you build kind of the knowledge and skills necessary to succeed in QSRM?
Yeah, so for the knowledge part, like, I kind of already touched on this, but it was a lot of just like reading articles online about like what fast food restaurants have recently implemented and, how they grow. But, for the other half of it, like the skills kind of necessary are like being able to communicate to your judge, being able to come up with things on the fly. I think in all role plays, right? Like that's a skill that you need to have. You have to be creative and you have to be able to come up with solutions on the spot. So what that means is like if for example like one of your role plays is asking you to like implement a marketing initiative for a restaurant, right? Like you have to you have to think outside of the box and you have to try to think like what are my competitors not doing that I can do and stand out to my judges. So I think part of that is like, if you have a strong knowledge base that'll allow that's going to allow you to be more creative, but at the same time it's like, you know taking advantage of your resources, like using that paper that you're given to, make a menu or make a budget or something that can make you stand out. I think that's really important in QSRM.
Right. So you mentioned earlier like the quick and like fast-paced environment of a role play, obviously. So what are some key strategies for handling that? Like how do you adjust to prompts? How do you use your prep time, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's very important to stay organized. So the method I've been using for like the past, like ever since I started DECA, is I'll have like one sheet that's strictly dedicated for notes. And then for each like performance indicator, I'll have at least like one visual or creative item that I can show to the judges. So from a notes sheet, I'll kind of make like some like very quick bullet points on each of the PIs. So if there's a business like vocabulary term I want to use, I'll quickly jot that down. And while I'm presenting, I'll kind of reference that. And for the other half of it, like the creative items or visual aids, that's something that you have to be able to come up with quickly, and it has to be relevant to the scenario. So I think the best way to master that is simply through practice. So doing a lot of role plays ahead of time, brainstorming some visuals, like it could be a menu, it could be a laptop, it could be an acronym, it could be really anything you want, and just making sure that you use that in the role play, and you understand how much time is left to prepare. I think that's something that really gets a lot of people, is that they don't really, it's hard for them to estimate how long 10 minutes is. But I think, when you do a lot of practice and you do a lot of role plays, that kind of comes naturally.
So, I mean, you talked to like a lot about kind of that environment, that fast pace, and obviously you've competed in a ton of role plays. So let's kind of talk about, I guess, from regional to state to ICDC level. At least in your 2 years of experience, how has QSRM kind of differed on each of these different stages of competition for you?
Yeah, I think there's two main things. The first is obviously the scale. In regionals, we have about like maybe 18 to 20 max competitors in the event. And in ICDC, there's 10 groups of 20 competitors. So, there's definitely a lot more people you're competing against. And the reason that's important is because, again, like it's much more difficult to make yourself stand out to your judges. So, what I do is like in regionals, I might use some visuals that other people like. I might use an acronym, or I might use like a statistic that other people might also use. But for ICDC, I really focused on being like creative and making visuals that would make me stand out. So that's one thing. Um, the other thing is that the role plays get more and more difficult as you go from regional to ICDC. So in regionals, like you might get some of the more easy PIs that are more common and show up a lot. But in ICDC, your PIs might be a lot more complicated. They might ask you to, make a 3-step plan, or they might ask you to do something in addition to answering the PIs. And I think that also requires a lot of preparation. So, instead of maybe only doing like state or regional level role plays, try to practice with ICDC level role plays, and that'll allow you to develop the skills necessary to compete at both levels.
All right, you touched a little bit on your visuals, like the creative ones and some basic ones. Could you give some examples of like the basic ones that you use and some more creative ones?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the most common, like basic one, is like any sort of like depiction of data. So, what I mean by that is it could be a pie chart, it could be a bar graph, or like, a simple like scatter plot. And it can really be about anything that applies to the scenario. But what that lets the judges know is that you're thinking critically. So, that's something that might be a little bit more common, but it's always good to have in your role play, because it shows that you're approaching the situation from several different viewpoints. And, as for more creative visuals, I think it's good to try those out in like states and ICDC, because that's really where you want to stand out. I think something that I did, which is like kind of like my signature visual item, is like I always made like an origami heart, and I would like give it to the judges to kind of like appeal to them, like customers are a number one priority, or saying something like that. And I think that really made me stand out, and it just left a good impression on judges. So that's one of more creative items. But I think it's necessary to have like a balance of like, regular, easy to make visuals. And if you have time, then you can go for some more creative ones as well.
Okay. And now kind of shifting gears. So, thinking about QSRM, right? What were some of the biggest challenges you faced in, I guess, preparing for it? And then also, what were your biggest challenges when you were actually competing? So maybe like a couple months or maybe a couple weeks in advance, what were some of those challenges you were facing? And then like on that day of or while you're in that role play, what were some of the biggest things that you dealt with?
Yeah. So I think initially, like one of the biggest challenges I had was I've never been a great like test taker. So that hospitality and tourism test has like always consistently been my biggest weakness. So in order to like, kind of tackle that part of it, what I did was I just did a lot of tests like on the bus to SCDC, or like on the way to like these conferences, or before, I would do like maybe like a test every like couple of days, and then I would go over my answers. And that really helped me improve my scores, because a lot of times DECA likes to reuse questions from previous tests or practice tests. So understanding those concepts and even the questions themselves allowed me to improve my test scores by a good margin. So that was one part of it. I would say the other part of like role plays that I really struggled with is like that time management and speaking under that time crunch. I know that like a lot of new members struggle to have a role play that's 10 minutes long, but with more and more practice, you'll find that the problem might actually be the other way around. Like it's hard to have your presentation fall under 10 minutes and account for the time that there is for like asking questions and other stuff like that. So time management was definitely probably my biggest problem. And the way I handled that was, again, through like repeated practice, like keeping a timer next to me, doing practice role plays during club meetings. I think, practice is honestly the best way to tackle most challenges. And yeah, it's what helped me get better at the event as well.
All right, cool. Now let's talk some more like prompt specific questions. So in QSRM, customer satisfaction is often key, like you're trying to maximize that, or the prompt gives you something related to that. How do you ensure that your role play strategies prioritize the customer experience? Like what are some vocab words that you drop and some visuals that go along with that?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned earlier, like the whole making a heart as a visual thing. I think that was like the number one thing I did to represent like customer service and a commitment to customer service. I know a very common PI in like hospitality role plays is demonstrate a customer service mindset. And, if that wasn't a PI, that's something that I would always say in like every one of my role plays. Like, our goal is to maintain a customer service mindset. And I would go one step further by kind of defining that as well. Like a customer service mindset is where the customer is the number one priority. The business goes out of their way to address customer complaints and needs, and, stuff that falls under that category. So, that's the best way in a hospitality and tourism role play to address customer satisfaction, is just ensuring that the judges know you're putting the customer first. I think communicate like saying that exact sentence just makes judges know that you're knowledgeable about the topic, and it answers a lot of PIs. So yeah, that's the main way I would go about it.
So we talked a lot about visuals. Let's again kind of shift the way we're thinking, and so whenever you've been in competition, I'm sure you've always kind of maybe had some roadblocks or issues that have come up during your competition. So I want you to think back to the biggest, most major challenge that you've had during competition, and maybe reflect with us a little bit about not only how you approached it, but also how you think, like if you could redo it, what would you have done better that time to go about it?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of roadblocks like during role plays. I think something that's very memorable to me is um, I had a judge, like this was either last year or 2 years ago, and my judge was like, usually judges, they nod, they might, engage with you during the presentation, but my judge like quite literally said nothing the entire time. She was staring at me, giving me a very stern face. And even when I tried to make like jokes, or I tried to do something creative, she wouldn't really say anything or give me any kind of affirmation. And what that caused me to do was like it made me freeze a lot. It ended up making me stutter a lot more, and it made me overall a lot less confident. And I think, in the future, if I was in that position again, I would really like not have I would have tried not to freeze and stutter, and not let that diminish my self-confidence, because in a role play your judge can sense how confident you are and how knowledgeable you are. And oftentimes, even if you're not knowledgeable necessarily in the topic, or you don't know how to answer a question, if you maintain that confidence, then oftentimes your judge is going to think they're going to automatically assume that you know what you're talking about. So if I could go back and kind of address that, I would have just stayed confident and stayed calm. I think that's very important to do during every role play.
All right, yeah, you talked about confidence and staying calm, but what else do you think are like some specific unique skills that make someone stand out in QSRM versus like other DECA events? Like, what is unique about this event and what sort of skills do you need to develop?
Yeah, definitely. I think the most important skill to have in QSRM and any hospitality event really is maintaining empathy. Because what judges are often looking for is if you this person, like if I am an employer, if I'm an employee at a company, how am I gonna, number one, obviously make that company succeed, but number two, ensure that customers customers are satisfied and customers would want to keep coming back to the business. So having empathy means like not only expressing that to the judges, but also kind of learning like the vocabulary, the skills necessary to communicate that to your judges. So, knowing terms like cultural sensitivity or like, emotional understanding, like tact, like these are all like basic business vocabulary terms that I use in like almost every one of my role plays. And, especially in the hospitality and tourism industry, like that's something that matters a lot. And just memorizing those terms and like expressing them through maybe your visuals or your presentation, I think that's very important. And that's probably like the number one thing to maintain when you're doing hospitality events.
Okay, so number one thing, let's kind of talk about, I mean, every business, right? They have financials. There's tons of financial stuff, and it really feels like it's kind of a part of everything at this point. So with QSRM, how important would you say was your understanding of these financial concepts, such as like, budgeting or pricing, or really anything related to finance? How important was that to your success?
Yeah, I think of all events, quick serve is probably the one where you need like the least amount of financial understanding. Um, like definitely compared to events in like the finance cluster, entrepreneurship, like hospitality and tourism is more qualitative rather than, exact like nitty-gritty details or numbers and stuff like that. I will say though, you need to have a basic understanding of fundamental business concepts. Like you need to know how pricing works at a restaurant, right? You need to know how profit is maximized. You need to know like basic economic and business concepts. I think that goes for any DECA event. But for quick serve, especially, like you don't necessarily need to know everything related to finance, but you can implement that into your presentations just to go the extra mile and stand out. So, I had a basic understanding of like accounting and budgeting and finance. So I did use that in a couple of my role plays. But if that's something that you're not too familiar with, I don't think it would be that big of a cause for concern.
All right, going off of that, what do you think are some common mistakes or some areas that people don't really think they need to prepare in, right? Like QSRM, you read the prompts, you do a few practice role plays, but what are some areas that you think people might miss in practice, or what did you personally miss in practice if you did?
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of time reviewing like the same core PIs. So, in hospitality and tourism, that's like demonstrate a customer service mindset or explain the types of communication. I spent a lot of time like just rehearsing those exact PIs over and over again. And I think something that people miss is like there's like, there's a document that DECA releases every year with every single PI, and there are so many more PIs than you would expect or imagine. And I didn't even know about that document until like maybe like last year. So, I think what people miss a lot is understanding all the different types of PIs that can show up and understanding that just because it's a hospitality and tourism role play doesn't mean that other PIs from other clusters can't show up. Like it's been pretty common for me to actually have PIs like, explain the nature of economics and, PIs from other clusters. And I think you need to have a solid understanding, like a well-rounded understanding of all the different clusters in DECA and how to answer PIs from all of them. I think not just looking at hospitality and tourism, it's more important that you have an overall understanding of business as a whole.
Okay, and Thank you so much. As we're preparing to kind of wrap up and open the floor to questions, I guess kind of the last question from us will be, what's your biggest takeaway or lesson that you've learned from competing in DECA that you plan on taking with you into, your career and life and everything else?
I would say the value of networking for sure is the number one thing I've learned from DECA. I think I've met like so many new people just from like competing and traveling to ICDC and stuff. I think networking is like super important because it prepares you for the future, obviously, but it also helps you build like your communication skills and DECA like presentations also help you do that, of course. But I think networking is like it's a great way to meet new people. It's really fun. And I think that's just the number one thing I've learned from DECA. And I hope I have a pretty solid network now that's gonna enable me for success in the future as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ashwath. Answers were great. And I think now we will open the floor up to some questions. So, oh, okay, I already got one from Jasmeet. So, the question was, how much time did you spend every day or weekly studying for your event?
Yeah, I think it definitely varied. It's not like consistently throughout the year I allotted like 1 or 2 hours a week toward DECA. It was more, in the final like 2 or 3 weeks leading up to competition, I did a lot of role play exam prep, and I spent like, we all have like DECA in our school. We all have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings. I think what I did was I went to all of those meetings and I would either be a mentor or I would be doing the practice role play. And, I think that was very important. And then probably like leading up to like ICDC and SCDC, I would probably spend maybe like 3, 4 hours on, just test prep and maybe like 1 or 2 on role play prep. But I think what's more important than like kind of setting out a schedule for yourself is doing practice role plays as much as possible, like whenever you have the opportunity. I would say do like, you know, maybe like 2 or 3 a week and you should be good.
All right, so we got another question. What do you do if you get a PI that you literally have like no idea about? Like, how do you fake your confidence or how do you apply knowledge from other areas to like help you answer that question?
Yeah, that's definitely happened to me a couple times. And I think the best way to go about it is kind of like if you have knowledge in an adjacent field, or if you had kind of prepared something ahead of time, try to like morph the PI to fit into that. So, if it's a term that you're unfamiliar with, maybe use like a synonym and kind of like define it in that way. And the other thing you should do is like always connect every PI back to the situation. So if you don't necessarily know like how to answer like the technical aspects of a PI, you can at least kind of go through and reason it out with the scenario that's been given to you. But I think what's most important through like all of that is just like be confident, be assertive, and make the judge think that you know what you're talking about, because a lot of times, like especially in regional and state conferences, there's a lot of parent judges who, just like you, might not be like experts in the field. So if you kind of exhibit that confidence and still use like business vocabulary or vocabulary that you've learned ahead of time, I think you should be fine, even if you don't know the PI.
Okay. One more question. This was kind of related to what you were talking about earlier. You were mentioning kind of like unique visuals at ICDC. If you do remember, could you elaborate on your finals ICDC prompt and an example of how you took a creative angle on one of, those performance indicators, or really just anything about that?
Yeah, I think my final role play at ICDC was very weird. It was something about making like a puppy cafe or something like that, and like designing like marketing for that. And the angle I took on it was like, again, like customer satisfaction is the number one priority, but also making it like a fun and enjoyable experience for both like dogs or like animals, I guess, pets and pet owners. So the way I did it was like I created an entirely new menu. And like the names of the items in the menu were kind of correlated with like examples of like pets and stuff. So, like I made like something like a Labrador, like Labradoodle latte or something like that. And like I just made like a bunch of creative, like new item names. And I think I made some visuals to correspond with that. I took one paper and like I made a menu and I labeled all the items and the prices. And I think just, being creative like that and like going the extra mile, that's definitely something that allowed me to win. So that's the main visual I remember. But other than that, I made some basic ones. I made like some stats. I made the heart, stuff like that. I think those are the visuals I used. Yeah.
Okay. And I think I have one more question. So this is kind of again similarly kind of looking at a retrospective look, but so on that same idea of your ICDC prompt about the puppy cafe, I mean, obviously there's not much better you can do than first, but what was there something that you maybe would have done differently if you had the chance, or maybe if it was your prep time, your actual role play leading up to it, something you would have done differently in order to, you know, give a better personal performance, even if, still did great.
Yeah. Um, I will say like probably my biggest weakness going into that role play was the fact that like obviously like I was extremely nervous, but I was also very unconfident because I was talking to like some of the competitors around me and like one person was like, yeah, I'm like the president of Rhode Island DECA and the other was the president of like Ontario DECA. And like, these people were I was like, these people are all like so much more successful than me. Like there's no way I'm gonna win, right? And I kind of brought that energy like into the role play at first, so that was definitely something I was worried about is like, is my judge going to perceive me as being unconfident? So, if I could go back in time and change that, I would kind of just make sure like, you know, the way I was approaching the role play was different. I would kind of not kind of like demean myself or demotivate myself. And I would like try to be more confident. I think that's what I would change. Yeah.
All right, cool. We have no other questions, but thank you so much for being with us today. We definitely learned a lot from your experience, and congrats again on first place at ICDC.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for setting this up as well.
Of course, yeah. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Um, and it was, a pleasure to talk with you, Ashwith, and I'm sure we all learned a lot.
Thank you.